Hello and welcome to another episode of the Halloween Podcast. I am your host, Lyle Perez. You're listening to episode 21 of our special series, The Dark Record, where we explore the unsettling, the unexplained, and the story's history refuses to let fade. In the summer of 1971, a small village in southern Spain became the focus of worldwide attention. Inside a modest kitchen, a strange image began to form on the concrete floor. At first, it looked like a stain, but soon it took shape. A face. The family tried to scrub it away. They replaced the floor. But the face returned, and before long more appeared. Men, women, expressions that shifted, faded, and reappeared as if alive. Word spread, drawing investigators, priests, skeptics, and journalists. Some called it a hoax. Others believed it was something much darker. Proof of psychic projection or spirits trapped beneath the house. The village of Belmez de la Moraleda would never be the same. The next entry into the dark record, the Belmez Faces. Let's begin. It was August 23, 1971, when life inside the modest home of Maria Gomez Camara changed forever. The morning was like any other in the quiet village of Belmez de la Moraleda. Maria went about her chores, preparing meals, moving through the kitchen where the floor was nothing more than worn cement, darkened with age. But as she glanced down, something caught her eye. At first, it looked like a stain, an irregular patch of discoloration. Nothing unusual for a cement floor in a rural Spanish home. But the longer Maria stared at it, the less it looked random, and the more it looked deliberate. Shapes emerged where there should have been none. Outlines of eyes, the shadow of a nose, the hollow suggestion of a mouth. What had seemed like nothing just moments earlier began to form a face. Startled, she called for her husband and son. Together, they bent over the strange patch, each trying to make sense of it. One saw the suggestion of a man. Another thought it was a woman. But what none of them could deny was that it was human. There, etched somehow into the concrete floor, was the image of a face staring back at them. The first instinct was simple: remove it. Maria scrubbed with soap and water, but the image remained. Her husband tried harsher methods: scraping, scouring, even chemicals. Still, the face clung to the floor as though it had grown from within the cement itself. Finally, they took drastic action. The entire section of the floor was broken up and removed. New concrete poured in its place. For a short time, the family breathed easier. The problem, they thought, was solved. But within days, it returned. The face came back. This time, it was sharper. The outline more pronounced, the features more visible. Almost as if the act of erasing it had only made it stronger. Maria could do nothing but watch as it stared up from her kitchen floor with a persistence that felt both unnatural and unnerving. And then, others followed. Over the next few weeks, more faces began to emerge, some small and faint, others stretched across entire tiles. Their expressions varied: neutral, anguished, even skeletal. Some appeared to shift orientation, turning to the side, or tilting upward as if aware of those standing above them. A few villagers swore the eyes seemed to follow them, blinking or moving when no one was looking. Word spread quickly. Friends, neighbors, and curious onlookers came to see for themselves. Some dismissed it as imagination. Others left shaken, convinced that something deeply unnatural was taking place. For Maria and her family, the kitchen became a place of dread. Every time they walked across the floor, they wondered what new face might appear beneath their feet. What began as a single, strange stain had grown into something larger, a mystery no mop could wash away. And for the people of Bélmez, the story was only beginning. The strange events inside the Gomez camera home didn't stay private for long. Word of the faces spread quickly through the small village, and before long, neighbors were knocking on the door. At first, they came with curiosity, wanting to see the so-called miracle or curse for themselves. But soon, the little house became a destination. People whispered in the streets about the caras, the faces, etched into the kitchen floor. The house earned a new name, La Casa de las Caras, the House of the Faces. For Maria, the attention was far from welcome. She was a devout Catholic woman, deeply unsettled by what was happening under her roof. She hadn't asked for reporters, priests, or strangers crowding into her kitchen. She hadn't wanted the rumors that swirled through the village, whispers of hauntings, curses, even the devil's work. But whether she liked it or not, her home had become a stage for something she couldn't control. It didn't take long for officials to get involved. The mayor himself ordered an investigation, if only to calm the growing frenzy. The idea was simple: look beneath the kitchen floor and see if there was a natural explanation. Workers came in, breaking up parts of the floor where the images had appeared. What they found stopped them cold. Beneath the kitchen, hidden just below the surface, were human remains, skeletal fragments, skulls, graves that seemed to date back centuries. No one knew how many bodies had once rested beneath the house, but there was no question. They were there. The discovery only fueled speculation. Was the house built over an old cemetery? Were these unmarked graves from war or plague? Or were they something darker, deliberately concealed? Whatever the origin, the link between the faces and the bones seemed undeniable. The remains were carefully removed, placed in coffins, and reburied in consecrated ground. A local priest blessed the home, sprinkling holy water and offering prayers in hopes of putting an end to the disturbance. For a short while, the family held on to hope. Perhaps the spirits had been restless, their presence bleeding into the world above until given proper rest. But that hope didn't last. The faces came back. And this time, villagers claimed they were more vivid than before, eyes darker, expression sharper. New figures taking shape where none had been before. Some swore they could make out groups, clusters of faces, almost as if entire crowds had been pressed into the cement. To believers, this was no longer a question of stains or tricks of the imagination. This was proof that something haunted the Gomez camera home. And as the crowds grew larger, the attention of the outside world was drawn to Belmez. Journalists from across Spain arrived to take photographs and write about the phenomenon. Paranormal researchers and skeptics traveled in, each hoping to be the one to solve the mystery or expose it. The small kitchen in southern Spain had become one of the strangest focal points of paranormal investigation in the modern era. And despite the blessings, the burials, and the endless scrubbing, the faces refused to disappear. They were only getting stronger. As news of the Belmez Faces spread beyond Spain, the phenomenon attracted not only the curious, but also investigators determined to solve the mystery. By the mid-1970s, the little kitchen in Maria Gomez Camara's home had become a battleground between belief and skepticism. One of the most persistent theories was rooted not in the supernatural, but in psychology. Some parapsychologists proposed that the faces were examples of thoughtography, the idea that a person's mind could unconsciously project images onto physical surfaces. This theory pointed squarely at Maria herself. She was, after all, the constant factor. The first face had appeared while she was home. When she left the house for extended periods, activity seemed to diminish. And when she was under stress, some claimed the faces looked more anguished, as if mirroring her emotions. To believers, Maria was not a fraud, but a conduit. Her mind, perhaps shaped by personal trauma or buried emotions, was creating images no brush or chisel could explain. If true, it would make Bélmez one of the most striking cases of psychic phenomena ever recorded. But skeptics were not convinced. They argued that the mystery was less about the mind and more about chemistry. Some suggested the images could have been painted with substances like lead oxide or silver nitrate, materials that could seep into porous concrete and produce lasting stains that resembled faces. If someone in the household had a basic knowledge of these chemicals, creating the images wouldn't have been difficult. The motive, skeptics argued, was clear: attention and money. By the mid-1970s, Belmez de la Moraleda was attracting visitors from across Spain. Tourists filled local hotels, restaurants, and shops. Reporters returned again and again, each story fueling the legend. Surely some reasoned the Gomez family had something to gain. And yet, the facts didn't always align with the hoax theory. For years, Maria refused to accept money from visitors. She had not turned her home into a tourist attraction, nor did she appear to enjoy the attention. On the contrary, she often seemed exhausted, even burdened by it. If this was a hoax, it was one that brought her far more discomfort than benefit. Scientific testing was brought in to settle the matter. Researchers from Spain's Institute of Ceramics and Glass took samples from the kitchen floor to analyze them for signs of paint, pigment, or chemical manipulation. Their results were puzzling. No evidence of paint was found. No chemical compounds consistent with image-making materials could be detected. Later studies in the 1990s and early 2000s reached the same conclusion. There was no clear sign of forgery. This left the case in limbo. Believers pointed to the tests as proof of authenticity. Skeptics countered that the studies were flawed or that evidence of tampering could have degraded over time. Still others dismissed the faces as a form of pareidolia, the brain's natural tendency to see faces in random patterns, like clouds or shadows. But pareidolia could not account for one disturbing fact. The faces of Bélmez were not static. They changed. And it was in those changes that the mystery deepened further. From the very beginning, what set the Bélmez phenomenon apart from ordinary stains or marks was its persistence. But over time, witnesses began to notice something even stranger. The faces were not fixed. They seemed alive in a way that concrete had no right to be. Visitors who spent more than a few hours in the house sometimes swore they saw subtle changes. A mouth that had once been shut appeared to open. Eyes that looked sideways seemed to shift toward the ceiling. A neutral face seemed, over days, to sink into anguish. These weren't illusions of light or shadow, at least not to those who swore they saw it happen with their own eyes. To test these claims, investigators turned to photography. In the mid-1970s, journalists began documenting the faces at regular intervals, snapping pictures weeks apart. In one instance, a sequence of photographs appeared to show a single face transforming from grim to smiling. The implication was unnerving. Not only were the faces forming spontaneously, but they were capable of changing expression as if responding to something or someone. Skeptics dismissed the reports. To them, the photos were poor quality, open to interpretation, Grainy black and white images of stains on cement could look like anything, depending on what the viewer wanted to see. But even under scrutiny, the claim that the faces altered over time refused to disappear. The controversy reached a new level when officials decided to intervene directly. To silence accusations of tampering, part of the kitchen floor was covered and sealed under strict supervision. For 3 months, no one was allowed to touch it. When the seal was lifted, what had once been a relatively blank surface now bore a distorted image of a face, subtle but undeniably different than before. To believers, this was irrefutable proof that no human hand was responsible. Still, critics were quick to find fault. They argued that changes could be explained by natural processes, shifts in moisture, variations in temperature, or chemical reactions within the concrete. The human brain, desperate to find meaning, would interpret these random changes as eyes, mouths, and expressions. Pareidolia, they insisted, was still the most rational answer. But the phenomenon didn't stop with a single face. By the late 1970s, dozens of figures had been reported in the Belmez camera home. Some appeared on the floor, others on walls and doorways. A few seemed to cluster together, forming what looked like groups, almost like crowds pressed into the very structure of the house. To those who believed, the changes suggested something deeper than coincidence. Were these images the work of restless souls beneath the house? Were they reaching out, reshaping themselves to be noticed? Or were they, as some parapsychologists claimed, visual manifestations of Maria's own subconscious? Her inner life projected in shifting expressions across the cement. Whatever the explanation, one thing became clear. The faces of Bélmez were not fading away. If anything, they were multiplying, growing, evolving, turning a private home into a gallery of the unexplainable. By the 1980s, the Belmez Faces had already secured their place as one of the most debated mysteries in modern paranormal history. But the story didn't end there. The phenomenon persisted for decades, evolving long after the first images appeared in Maria Gomez Camara's kitchen. In 1991, Spanish journalist and investigator Iker Jimenez, who would later become a prominent voice in European paranormal research, brought the case back into the spotlight. His reporting reignited interest, framing Bélmez not as a quaint curiosity, but as one of the strongest cases for psychic phenomena ever recorded. Jimenez insisted that Maria was central to the mystery. She wasn't faking it, he argued. She was the key. Through the 1990s, parapsychology groups revisited the Gomez home, conducting fresh studies and photographing the faces under controlled conditions. Reports claimed that new figures were still appearing, even as the original images faded or shifted. Visitors continued to describe the unnerving sensation of being watched while standing in the kitchen. For many believers, Bélmez had moved beyond the category of folklore. It was living evidence that science could not explain. Then came a turning point. On February 3, 2004, at the age of 85, Maria Gomez Camara passed away. For the first time in more than 3 decades, the house fell quiet. Many wondered if the phenomenon had been tied to her presence all along. If Maria truly was the psychic focus, perhaps the faces would die with her. For about a year, it seemed that might be true. But then, in 2005, reports emerged of new images forming, not in the kitchen, but in a different part of the house. These new faces, however, were different, cruder, less defined. The expressions lacked the unsettling realism of the originals. To skeptics, this was confirmation. The phenomenon had lost its anchor, and what remained was nothing more than human tampering. Accusations of forgery flared again, casting suspicion on those who remained in charge of the property. Still, some researchers pressed on. In 2014, the Spanish television program Cuarto Milenio conducted forensic analysis on samples taken from the home. Their team of chemists and specialists searched for signs of pigments or artificial compounds. The results were strikingly similar to earlier studies. No trace of paint, no chemical evidence of fraud. Once again, the mystery deepened instead of resolving. In their final report, one of the experts wrote simply, "We are bewildered." Today, parts of the original kitchen floor are preserved under protective glass. Visitors continue to travel to Belmez de la Moraleda, hoping to glimpse the faces that made the village famous. Some leave convinced they've seen proof of life after death. Others shake their heads, certain it's nothing more than stains and suggestion. But more than 50 years later, the debate is still alive. The faces have endured skeptics, investigators, and even the death of the woman at their center. They remain, faded, fractured, but never gone. And in that persistence lies the power of the mystery. What has always struck me about the Belmez Faces isn't just the images themselves, it's the reaction they inspire. There's something deeply unsettling about a human face where it doesn't belong. We're hardwired to recognize expressions, to search for meaning in the tilt of an eye or the curve of a mouth. So when those features appear in cold cement, staring back from the floor of a stranger's kitchen, it feels like a violation of the ordinary. I can understand why people argued so fiercely about what was happening in that little house. If you believe the faces were real, then you're staring at evidence of something beyond explanation. Proof that death leaves an imprint, that emotion can stain stone. If you lean towards skepticism, the persistence of the phenomenon still gnaws at you. Why didn't the tests prove forgery? Why didn't the images fade once and for all when the floor was replaced or when Maria passed away? For me, the story lingers because it resists resolution. Most mysteries over time unravel into something mundane, a trick of the light, a misunderstood event, a tale inflated by rumor. But Bélmez has held its ground, not because it's impossible to debunk, but because every attempt at explanation leaves behind loose ends. The science is inconclusive, the witnesses too many, the faces too vivid, too persistent, to be dismissed entirely, and maybe that's why it unsettles me more than other hauntings. It's not the threat of ghosts or curses, it's the uncertainty. The idea that, even in an ordinary kitchen in a tiny Spanish village, the boundary between the living and the dead might not be as solid as we like to think. That a floor meant to hold the weight of daily life could instead hold on to something else, something no one can fully explain. The faces of Bélmez remind us that history doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it rises to meet us, staring back from the places we least expect. That brings us to the end of episode 21 of The Dark Record. For more than 50 years, the faces of Bélmez have defied explanation, appearing, fading, and reappearing in ways that continue to puzzle scientists and believers alike. Were they the lingering presence of restless souls beneath the house? Psychic impressions from Maria herself? Or simply a hoax that spiraled beyond control? The truth remains buried in that little kitchen in southern Spain, sealed beneath concrete and glass, waiting for the next pair of eyes to interpret what they see. Maybe the skeptics are right. Maybe we're just staring at stains. But maybe, just maybe, we're staring at something else. Something that refuses to let go of this world. What is certain is that Bélmez has earned its place in history as one of the most enduring mysteries of the paranormal age. A story that still unsettles because it never offers a clean answer. just faces, watching, waiting, remembered, retold, and now added to the record. Next time, we return to America, to the hills of West Virginia. There, in the 1890s, a murder case unfolded unlike any other in legal history. It's the only known instance where the testimony of a ghost, delivered through dreams, helped convict a killer. A strange and unsettling tale of justice from beyond the grave, the Greenbrier Ghost. Until then, I'm Lyle Perez, and this has been the Halloween Podcast presenting The Dark Record. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps keep the show alive and weird. You can also explore sources, extras, and more at our Facebook page at facebook.com/The Halloween Podcast or at our website, thehalloweenpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. Keep watching the shadows. And remember, not every face we see belongs to the living. Have a good night.